Good day, good people. My name is Brad King, and this is the Downtown Writers Jam video podcast, which is part of the Solid Listen Podcast Network. Max the Dog and I are coming to you from deep inside the Jam Bunker on the weekend before the 4th of July. I'm the only dog on the planet. I'm fairly certain that this is not hyperbole, who loves fireworks. Fireworks go off, he wants to go outside and watch them. So I am anxious to see what happens this weekend. Gonna have a little get together, some friends, girlfriends in town. Gonna be grilling out. I'm gonna have my dog watching fireworks. Today on the program, we have the wonderful Hannah Tovey. Her book, Is This It? Is out in July. You should pre-order it right now. So I'm gonna give you the bio, and then I'm gonna tell you the dumbass question that I ask and why these kinds of questions get asked. So Hannah's from South Wales, but she grew up in Hong Kong. This is important. What I just said is important to the question that I'm going to get to. She graduated from the Faber Academy in 2018, where she finished her debut novel, The Education of Ivy Edwards. She lives in East London, where she misses Lanelai Beach, which I don't know where that is. Maybe Wales, maybe Hong Kong. These are things that Americans don't know. Misses her mother and Cockles. Her second novel comes out in July. That's Is This It? So if you've listened to the program, if you're a long-time listener, first-time caller, I interviewed a woman a long time ago named Stephanie Scott. She was fantastic. She told the greatest anecdote ever about growing up eating breakfast with orangutan in the Hong Kong Zoo. So, being the asshole that I am, I see Hong Kong, I see London, and I go, well, Hannah, do you know Stephanie? Like, that's just the kind of thing you don't ask people, right? Like, what are the odds? Well, the odds are 100%. Like, they knew each other. I think maybe Stephanie came through the Faber Academy as well. I can't remember. And that may have been how they met. But I was just like, oh, writers, Hong Kong, like London. Surely the families must have known each other. I don't know why that went through my head, but that is also the kind of thing that I do in the real world. Drives my girlfriend crazy because I will literally just talk to anybody that walks by and I see things like that. And I'm like, oh, yeah, maybe. And in this case, yeah, it was a thing. So you got that to look forward to. Before we get to that, before you get to hear this amazing interview, and she's fantastic. We had such a good time. There's a tremendous amount of laughing. There's some business we got to get to. If you listen to the show, you know what's coming. So, the Jam Proper, our 60-minute show, comes out every Wednesday. And the video podcast, comes out on Mondays and Fridays ish. Like we record those as we get around to them. And there's two things you can do to help us spread the word about this show. Everybody's getting back. They're in their cars, they're going to school, like back to work, working out, hiking, doing all kinds of stuff. They still don't want to talk to people. They want to have, the earbuds in. So you need to tell them about this show so that they can listen. The other thing you need to do is leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got an iPhone or an iPad, head on over to Apple Podcasts. You can actually leave us a written review, and that would be fucking fantastic. You can also head over to our Facebook page and leave us a review there, or head to the Writers Jam and leave us a testimonial through the contact page. While you're there, you can check out this video series. You can also buy the books of anybody who's been on the show by clicking on that bookshop link. Looking for a book to read, we got a review section, or you can just sign up for the newsletter and all kind of goodness comes into your mailbox once a month. Your email box. I sound like I'm 1,000 years old right now. You can also support the entire Solid Listen network by clicking on that Patreon button. When you do, for just a couple bucks a month, commercial-free episodes of all of our shows and all kinds of special content by everybody on the network. This was a fun interview. I don't really have a whole lot. I sort of said some of it at the top of the show because you know what? I'm going to break format when I feel like breaking format. It's my goddamn show. She's fantastic. I always love interviews when I talk to authors and they're just like, you just sort of like sync up and you're just having a good time. It's one of my favorite parts about this show is meeting people from the other side of the world who you just get on with because you sort of do the same thing and you have not the same background, but the same things that drive you, the same things that interest you. Oftentimes, many writers that I know and hang out with have a similar weird sense of humor. If you're constantly dissecting the world, the fucking everything's kind of funny. Um, sometimes in a dark, tragic way, but like you sort of, you have to do that. You have to let that stuff off somewhere. Otherwise it will eat you up. It's why being a writer is the worst job in the whole world, but also the best job if it was in fact a job, which most of the time it is not. That is neither here nor there. So I'm really excited for you guys to hear this today. She's lovely. How often do you get to hear about whales? Not nearly as much as you should. So you're going to hear a little bit about that. And I appreciate you guys coming and spending just a little bit of time with Max and I here in the bunker. I hope that your day is going well. I hope that you are taking care of yourself and everybody around you as much as you can. Hope you're giving yourself some space and grace as we all move back into the world. And I hope you will sit back for the next 30 minutes or so and enjoy my conversation with Hannah Tovey. I was actually looking, this is a weird question since you live in a giant country. Do you know Stephanie Scott?
Yes, I do know Stephanie Scott. I do. So she studied at the Faber Academy, which is where I studied as well. We weren't in the same year. I think she was a couple of years below me, and there are like 6 classes per year. But I believe we had the same tutor, Richard Skinner. Yeah. Such a small world.
I just saw Hong Kong, and I was looking at your book and your writing, and I'm like, okay, what are the because I've had Stephanie on the show, and she's brilliant.
Have you? She's amazing. She's amazing. She's an incredible writer. Yeah.
And her story is also hilarious of like, as I'm recalling, like continually her father wanted her to do this thing, and like she was trying to do this thing, and then was like, I think I'm going to be a writer.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're born in Wales. Like, how do you guys end up in Hong Kong? Like, how does that happen?
So we ended up in Hong Kong. So my dad is an engineer. He does bridges and trains. That's his jam. And he got a job over there when I was 8. And so he moved out first. And then we followed from a very small town called Llanelli in South Wales. Even I struggle saying it sometimes, as you just
I saw you blink.
Like, and yes, we left this tiny, teeny town and moved to Hong Kong, which was phenomenal in so many ways, but also traumatizing when you're 9 and your friends are your whole entire world, and then you're told to move to this country that I hadn't heard of Hong Kong. I just knew that it was a 12-hour flight away, and that seemed like, oh my God. Yeah. And then we stayed there until, well, my dad's actually still there. I haven't seen him for 18 months because obviously not allowed to fly. So yeah, he's still out there. And then I moved back here for university when I was 18. But it's weird. I still call it home in an odd way, even though I haven't lived there for, I'm 35 next week. So that's a long time. And yeah, it still feels like home to me. Yeah.
It's weird, right? Like, I grew up in a very small town in Appalachia in Ohio.
Yeah.
But Austin is where so I have that hometown and I love that place, but I moved to Austin as an adult when I was like 22.
Austin's meant to be amazing. I've heard phenomenal things about it. Yeah.
It's pretty great. And, I was there for 10 years and like that feels very much like my home, even though I've spent in my entirety of my life, only 20% of my time there.
So strange, isn't it?
There's just something about like you find some places and you're like, I don't know what it is about this place, but it just...
yeah. Hong Kong's one of those places. I miss the food, I miss the people, I miss the smells. Like, it smells really grotty and grimy and really close, but I really miss that. The food's exceptional as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're in London now too, right?
Yes. Haven't been able to experience much restaurant eating for a long time. Ate inside my first restaurant last week, and that was incredible. I actually cried when I got home because I felt normal again, and hadn't felt like that for such a long time. But yeah, we do have a fantastic restaurant scene here, and hopefully it'll pick up, because I just feel so sorry for all those teeny tiny restaurants in the heart of central London, who can only their capacity is 20 people anyway. So for them to spread out chairs and socially distance, this must be a complete and utter nightmare.
Yeah, when I would spend time over there, I did work at the Soho Theater.
Oh yeah.
And which is great. I love Soho. And as I moved into my new house, I've been hanging pictures. So I've been ordering pictures to hang. And I came across this trove of stuff from Bar Italia, which is this
Oh
little
my
coffee shop,
God,
right? It's
yes.
this
On
great,
Dean's, I want to say it's on Dean Street, because Soho Theatre's on Dean Street, so maybe
yeah.
it is. Yeah,
But
amazing.
that's it's a little tiny place. It's like a little shotgun place. And I was just sort of like, oh, like even if they're open, they could only have like 4 people in
I
there. Like
know,
everybody would be sitting on the street. And
I know. So
uh,
tough for them.
yeah, and like that part of town is, I mean, I know all of London is sort of that way, but like that is primarily where I'd hang out. And it's like every place there is just this little
It's
tiny,
teeny
yeah.
tiny, teeny tiny.
And
Yeah,
so thinking about all that. So um I was looking at the book. Is this it?
yeah.
And this,
I
so Emily,
conveniently have a copy here.
that's very nice. Emily Given is like one of my favorite writers. Like I love
Oh
reading her
yeah,
books, and like I looked at this and started reading it. I'm like, oh, I feel like I get a sense of where this book is going. Like this feels like and like reading the description is obviously very cheeky as well. Like,
yes.
so tell me about the book. Tell me what the book is about.
So, um, Is This It is a comedy, and it's about big dreams and big love and refusing to settle for a half-lived life. So at the start of the novel, Ivy is the protagonist. She feels like something is missing from her life. She's just turned 30, and like a lot of women her age, she expected more. And she expected more because as women, we're told that by the time we hit 30, we have to have the perfect job, the perfect house, the perfect relationship. And that's just incredibly toxic in loads of ways. Anyway, I digress.
That's not in the book.
That is in the book.
Is it in the book?
Yes, definitely. So one evening she turns her phone off and she dreams of a better life, a better job, she dreams of more. The next morning, over a cold plate of pizza, she makes this list, and this list changes everything for her. And it's about the desires we have to change our life and how challenging that can be. And it also tackles themes of loneliness and this never-ending pressure on women to self-improve, which I think has never been more timely. Yeah, that is this it in a nutshell.
As every good comedy is rooted in like the daily horrors of life.
Yes, definitely the daily horrors of life for sure. And hopefully that's what makes it relatable. I'm very much as a writer interested in writing about complex women particularly, and to show them in all their facets, because I think that is important and that's what's true to life. And I think the more sort of you show female characters who are flawed and messy and
I like to call those human.
human.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the more you see that, the more you realize that it's okay to be that in you too, which I think is important.
Yeah. It's my my friend. I've known Janelle Brown for 20
Oh yeah.
something years. Like we were reporters and writers back a long time ago. So I watched her career. And when Watch Me Disappear came out, I brought her out to Indianapolis to do some events. We had this writing collective there. And I was like, oh my God, like one of the things I love about her books is like, I love the characters in your books. And she was like, actually, I'm accused of writing unlikable characters. And I was like,
Yeah.
well, I need to reconsider my entire life, because to me, I'm like, they're like, I like them because they are complex and rich. And like anybody that
Definitely.
I'm wearing a black hat, but like anybody that rolls in with a white or black hat, you're like, be more than that. Like because the world is really complicated and hard, and like you can be good in one ways and bad in the other. And like I find those characters more interesting.
Absolutely. I think that there's a lot of comedy in pain and heartache, and I've always found that
Yeah.
really interesting. I'm not drawn to characters who have their shit together. I don't think that's relatable, but also it's not exciting or thought provoking. It's like, yeah, it's not exciting to me at all as a reader or a writer. And so I think it's really important to put all the shit on the page and throw as much as you can as at a character and just see what happens. I'm all for that.
And also, I mean, I've always told people, like, if I see somebody and they're like, oh my God, their life is perfect, I'm like, they're lying about something.
Everyone is lying. Everyone is
Yeah.
just faking it and lying to themselves and lying to you. Like everyone's struggling on the inside, and that's just life, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and it's what, I've had this discussion with people who like write rom-coms and comedies and things
Mm,
of that nature. I actually find those to be, because I realize, like, in the literary world, those are sometimes sort of put off in this other sort of little corner of a thing. And that, like, I think about the shows that I love watching,
yeah.
like Parks and Rec, or like now Ted Lasso, or like the British Office, like seeing these things that are like, you actually can
You were
mine
speaking my language,
yeah, like
100% speaking my language.
you can really mine I mean, I would hope so, since you're writing these books about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, there is a certain like, you can mine the sort of, again, the drudgeries of life, which is what it means
Mm,
to be human in those
what it means
kinds
to be
of
human.
places,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
um
Yeah. I actually, as part of my research, and I'm not lying when I say this to you, I watched The Office, the American one, and Parks and Rec. I think if I want to be a bit inspired, particularly when I'm writing dialogue, I go towards US sitcoms because they write about, it's that sort of, you're writing about often, often topics that seem mundane, but they are brought to life in such color and comedy. And I think there are a ton of US sitcoms who do that incredibly well. So yeah, if I want to feel inspired, I'm like Parks and Rec, The
yeah.
Office, absolutely.
Michael Schur, like Michael Schur did,
Michael Schur, oh
right?
my
Like
God,
The
yeah.
Good Place, Parks
Yeah.
and Rec, like Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Like Brooklyn
Brooklyn
Nine-Nine's a little
Nine-Nine he
more,
did, of course he did as well. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's a little
He's
more
amazing.
satirical and a little bit less
Yeah.
grounded in reality, but like,
Still
um
super funny.
yeah, it's hilarious. But like The
It's really
Good
funny.
Place, in
I
at
haven't seen it.
oh my gosh. So it turns out, this is just a side, it turns out that the book that show was based on was written by the father of my first editor at Wired. So I like
Oh my
fell in love with this
gosh.
show, and I'm writing about it, and all of a sudden Jesse sends a book. She's like, by the way, my dad, who's a philosopher, wrote the book that show is based on.
Oh my God. When did you write that book?
Like a long time ago.
Wow, that just
Yeah.
goes to show, right?
Yeah, but
Wow.
I think if you like those other shows, like, I feel like that show will speak to you,
Okay.
because it's both funny, but it's in the afterlife, so everybody's dead.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a treatise on, like, what does it mean to be a human,
Okay.
and all of its facets, and it's got a diverse cast, and like, those are the kinds of things, like, anyway, like, when I see books, when I see these sort of comedies or rom-coms or wherever, I don't really like labels, but wherever this falls into, I'm like, oh, this is going to be that book, right? Like, there's
Yeah.
going to be some things that are mined around that. And it's not just going to be like fluffy, everybody is happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with rom-com and with chick lit, it gets a really bad rep because people think you can't be a serious writer and do chick lit or rom-com, but I completely disagree with
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And I think they are incredible genres that are really important and provide just a lot of like joy. And I think that's really important to readers.
Yeah, I've had that discussion with people on this show so many times. Like, in fact, I was talking about it the other day. Horror and the romance world, where
Mm,
people are building their own careers by like pumping stuff out once a month. I've told people, like, anybody that dismisses that has no idea how. I'm not saying that everything is War and Peace, but like, you sit down and write something that's
yeah,
publishable once a month, rip and do it, and like build a
yeah,
fan base and get people invested in the world you're building. I'm like, it may not be your cup of tea, but don't tell me that that's not work and skillful.
yeah. I completely agree with you, Bran.
Yeah. So, this is like, I rarely ask literary questions, but like, what was the question? Like, what was the question that set you down the road to write this book? Like, what was the thing where you were like, oh, that popped into my head, and there we are.
So I I had the idea of Ivy, although I didn't know that she would become Ivy when I was sort of early 20s. I wanted to be an actress. I trained to be an actress, but because I have a stammer, even though I'd never stammered on stage, in the audition process was excruciating, and I then began writing loads as as a release, really, which was amazing in lots of ways. And I knew I wanted to write about Welsh characters because you don't really see a lot of Welsh characters on screen or on the page. I also knew that I wanted to write about this notion of identity, because I'm from South Wales, we moved to Hong Kong, I live in London, and that notion of who you are and where you think of as home has always really sort of appealed to me. Also, I'm just really drawn to, as I said earlier, just like female characters who are on the edge, on the emotional edge, who are, you know, about to lose their shit. I find that really interesting and really exciting as a reader. And so I've always wanted to explore that.
In another interview, we'll figure out why that is.
That could be a long
yeah.
interview, okay? That could be a long interview. But yeah, I think, and then before I joined Faber Academy, and I did their 6-month writing course, and it was incredible because every week 15 people critique your work, and sort of I honed the story then, but I always knew kind of vaguely what I wanted to write about, but it wasn't until I would say just before I was 30 that I kind of the story crystallized. And I think that's why it's important that she had that the character had just turned 30, because I think that throws up a ton of questions as a woman, and I think it's a really interesting topic to explore.
Yeah, I mean, and we talked a little bit about this before. There are benchmarks. I always tell people, like, there are just benchmarks in everybody's life. Like 25 is sort of one, like 30 is absolutely one. Like I always tell people 30 is like when you suddenly have more friends that are further out of university than, like, you're hanging out with a different crowd. The expectation is different, right? Like it's no longer let's go out Tuesday night. It's like, it's Tuesday night. I am not going out. Like what?
Yes.
Right. And
yes.
like there's just that demarcation of 30, I think, is the first big, like, oh shit. Like because I remember when I turned 30, I was working as an editorial assistant. I think I was 28 or 29 actually.
Yeah.
And I went to my bosses and I was like, I'm not going to be a 30-year-old editorial assistant. And I ended up getting a different job as an editor and writer at a different place. And it was literally because I'm like, that job is okay in your 20s, but if you're doing that in your 30s, like for whatever reason, I was like, there's just that trajectory is not right. Like you've done something wrong. So I do feel like that is a fulcrum point that, you know, obviously for gender and race and like all of those things are sort of, they're different for everybody, but I feel like 30 is the thing we all like, yep.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be, because it's one of the things I explore in the book. Like life is, you know, constantly changing. You can do anything at 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever, but the society tells us that you have to be at a certain stage at your life at a certain age, and I think it's so toxic, and there's a price that we as women pay for that, the pressure that we put on ourselves, and the cost of that, I think, is really severe, and I think a lot of people don't talk about it. But yeah, I mean, when you're 30, you're expected to be married and with children and have this perfect job. And I just, it's toxic. Yeah, that's right word to use, toxic.
I think that it is, this is one of those like topics that we could, you know, over a beer talk about forever. But for me, it is one of those, like, it's hard to separate society. I mean, obviously there are systemic things that push people and control us in ways that we don't see. There's also like local friend group. There's also like parent religious. Like, I think all of those things look different depending on where you're coming from and like what the expectation is.
Definitely.
And so this is very clearly an expectation of, like, you know, this sort of traditional Western, like, oh, this is what you are supposed to be doing. Right. Like this is where you're at. And I find, like, you've traveled around the world, so I know you see both the 30 thing, but also the ways different cultures and even micro cultures navigate that.
Absolutely. It's super interesting.
It is, and all, but only once you're through it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
At
Definitely
49.
not when you're in the thick of it.
No. And I was talking about this on a podcast the other day. Like, I wish, because I've been in therapy for the last 4 or 5 years,
Hmm.
because as a man, like I mean, what I have started telling people is like, men have to realize that we are weapons, and it is like we are loaded weapons all the time, and so it's incumbent upon us to like do it, like trauma therapy and emotion, like be okay, like develop your empathy so that that is not exploding out onto the world,
Yeah.
particularly white men, right? Where there's not really rails that sort of keep in the way that it keeps,
Yeah.
like there are rails for almost everybody else except for
Yeah.
us, right? And so, I was like, well, I wish I could go back to 15-year-old Brad and be like, what we're going to do? We're going to start a little therapy now. Like save you the 30 years of being an asshole.
What would a 15-year-old Brad have said to that person?
Well, I think if I showed up, I wouldn't have given him a choice. I don't think all 15-year-old boys should be given a choice. I'm like, here's what we're going to do, because you don't know anything.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So the last thing we're going to talk about, because again, we talked about this is act. So so when you said like there's not representation of like people from Wales, I'm from Appalachia, so you actually are saying a lot of things, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, I feel that deeply, because the Wales representations that I've seen on television are always like weird caricature, funny comedy, right? Playing up the language and the accent and the sort of like working class dumbness of, I put that in quotes, right? Like that is what the world knows as the Welsh way.
Absolutely. And also I don't speak the language. I don't speak Welsh, but I put a lot of Welsh language into the book, and I think it's important to see other languages on the page. And often in the UK, all we see is English and characters that are from London predominantly. We don't see a lot of characters that are outside of the big city, and I think that's changing. I think it's really important that it is changing. But yeah, I think the characters who you've seen traditionally who are Welsh are that stereotypical dumbed down version, I think. And I don't think that's fair. I think there's comedy in that to an extent, but I think it's important to see authentic Welsh characters, because I think we are very funny, passionate people, and Wales is just rich in culture, and the language is amazing. And I always feel really sad that kind of I left so young and hadn't had the opportunity to learn it, because it is a beautiful language. It's also freaking hard to learn, but it's beautiful, which is amazing.
It's like Hungary. Like it's
it does sound like it does. Yeah, exactly.
It's like a language that exists unto itself, and you're like, well,
like,
knowing any other language doesn't help you at all.
Yes, I had a Welsh teacher. I lived in Wales after uni for a few months, like 5 or 6 months. Had a Welsh tutor in that time, and she was like, look, if you're ever stuck, just add an O at the end of the verb and it becomes Welsh. And I was like, what? She's like, there's a word called...
That sounds like a terrible teacher.
She was a terrible teacher, but she's kind of right. Like, add an O and it becomes Welsh. Yeah, bizarre.
That's hilarious. It is one of those things that, until I started spending a lot of time in Europe, and like a lot of time, and would spend time in London and Birmingham and just sort of like bouncing around with my friends, I didn't know anything about Wales, right? Like in America, that's just not like, I knew it as like, I think there's a character in Spaced who is like a DJ biker guy who's like, there's like occasionally there would be Welsh characters that would pop up in these, and they were always played for comedy.
Yeah.
And then I got there and I was like, oh my God, there's this whole, like, there's a thing. It's very much like Appalachia and here in a country where it's like, we're sort of the butt of the joke, but like, nobody's really like we've sort of been left behind and you're sort of not
Yeah,
really paying attention to us, and like
1,000,000%.
economics is, yeah. And I was like, oh, I feel like I need to spend some time in Wales because I feel like you guys are my people, like there.
Come back to Wales when you're allowed.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think
Do
the
it.
EU said, I think Europe said that if you're vaccinated, like we'll be able to come over in the summer or fall. So
Come on over.
I'm making plans. Hannah, it was lovely to talk to you. The book
So
Is
good
This
to talk
It
to you
is
too.
out. It's out in July, right?
It's out the 22nd of July. You can pre-order now if you want to treat yourself, and I'd be delighted if you could treat yourself.
Is it out in America and England, or is it just, do we go to Waterstones to get it?
You go to Waterstones. You can go to your local independent bookshop. If you're in the States, you'll be able to get it on ebook, and then you'll be able to get it on Amazon as well
Awesome.
from July. Yeah, but
Oh.
obviously don't go to Amazon. I should say that.
Yeah.
Don't go to Amazon.
I always
Don't
tell
go to
people, like,
Amazon.
if you can go to Bookshop, which is bookshop.org, which is the local bookstore affiliates around here.
Yes, but because I don't have a US publishing deal, it was really weird. Last year when my debut novel came out, you could get it on Amazon US, but you couldn't get it at other bookshops in US because I didn't have a publishing deal out there. So I was like, how did it get on Amazon? Anyway,
yeah.
Try to buy it elsewhere.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'm looking forward to reading it. It is so lovely to talk to you.
So good to talk to you too. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I hope we can do this again soon.
Awesome.
Well, there you have it. That was Hannah Tovey. Her book, Is This It?, is out in July. Before we get out of here, just a couple reminders. If you like what you heard, do us those 2 favors we talked about at the top of the show. Tell your friends about us. Leave us a review. If you've got that Apple phone or iPod, well, there you have it. That was Hannah Tovey. Her book, Is This It?, is out in July. Before we get out of here, just a couple reminders. If you like what you heard, do us those 2 favors we talked about at the top of the show. Tell your friends about us and leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you got an iPad or the iPhone, head on over to Apple Podcasts and you can leave us a little written review. Super helpful. While you're at it, don't forget to check out the other programs on the Solid Listen Podcast Network, including the flagship Mother May I Sleep With podcast with host and our Solid Listen podcast queen, Molly McLear. Don't forget, we've got these video podcasts coming out Monday, Friday-ish on the Solid Listen Network YouTube channel. You can also catch the audio on the Downtown Writers Jam podcast channel, and the Jam is out every Wednesday. So get yourself subscribed wherever you listen to podcasts and don't miss an episode. And remember, you can always catch us on Twitter and Instagram. Until the next time, I will see you around the internet, and happy 4th of July.